Every time I got a promotion, my parents suddenly needed large sums of money until a former accountant showed me a pattern that spanned 2 decades. The first time it happened, I was 24. I had just been promoted from junior analyst to team lead. It wasn't a massive promotion, but it was the first time I felt like my life was finally moving forward. 2 days later, my mother called me crying. Dad needed emergency dental surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. They were short $8,000. I didn't hesitate. They were my parents. I wired the money the same day. My father thanked me. My mother called me her hero. I felt proud, useful, needed. 3 years later, I got promoted again. This time, the call came 4 days afterward. Dad's truck transmission had failed. Without the truck, he couldn't work. The repair estimate was nearly $12,000. Again, I paid again. They promised to repay me. Again, they never did. I didn't care. At least that's what I told myself. When my next promotion came at age 31, the request arrived before I had even celebrated. Mom needed surgery. Insurance issues, complications, urgent, $15,000, then another promotion. Dad was facing a lawsuit, then another, property taxes, then another, a roof replacement, then another, medical debt. It became so routine that I started expecting the phone call. Every time my income increased, some disaster appeared. My younger sister, Rachel, noticed it too. One Thanksgiving, she pulled me aside. "Don't you think it's weird?" "What?" "The timing." I shrugged. "Bad luck." She laughed. "That's a lot of bad luck." I told her she was being cynical. She rolled her eyes. "You're the only one they ever ask." That wasn't true, or at least I thought it wasn't, but the comment stayed with me. A few weeks later, I casually asked Mom whether Rachel had helped with any recent expenses. The silence lasted half a second too long. "Rachel has her own bills." I let it go. Years passed. The requests continued. The amounts kept growing. 20,000, 25,000, 30,000. Whenever I tried discussing repayment, my parents acted hurt. "After all we'd done for you. Family helps family. You know we're good for it." I knew they weren't, but I loved them. At least I thought I did. Then came the promotion that changed everything. I was 38, vice president, my biggest career achievement. The salary increase was substantial. I hadn't even told many people yet, only my boss, my sister, and my parents. The call arrived less than 24 hours later. Dad had discovered a tax problem. Apparently there was a massive debt attached to their property. The government could seize the house. They needed $80,000. Immediately, $80,000. For the first time in my life, I hesitated, not because I couldn't afford it, because something felt wrong. I asked for paperwork. Dad got defensive. "Don't you trust me?" "Of course I trust you. Then why do you need documents?" Mom jumped in. "We raised you." The conversation somehow became about my lack of gratitude. I ended up apologizing. Then I sent the money. Afterward, I felt sick, not angry, not suspicious, just exhausted. A month later, I attended a business conference in Chicago. One of the guest speakers was discussing financial fraud. After the presentation, people mingled during a networking event. An older man introduced himself. His name was Harold. We chatted for nearly an hour. Eventually, family finances came up. I joked about being my parents' emergency fund. He laughed. Then he asked how often these emergencies occurred. I listed a few examples. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. "How long has this been happening?" I thought about it. "Almost 15 years. He stared at me. "You keep records?" "Not really." "You should." Something about his tone bothered me. He wasn't being dramatic. He sounded concerned. Before leaving, he handed me his card. Retired forensic accountant. That title lingered in my mind for weeks afterward. Then one Saturday, I got curious. I opened old bank records, email archives, text messages, wire confirmations. I started building a spreadsheet. The process took days, then weeks. There were far more transactions than I remembered. I had given my parents nearly $600,000 over 14 years. The number shocked me, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timing. Every major payment occurred shortly after a raise, bonus, promotion, stock vesting, or career milestone, almost all within 30 days. I stared at the pattern. Promotion, request, bonus, request, new job, request, stock payout, request. It looked almost scheduled. I called Harold. He agreed to review everything. A week later, he called back. His voice was unusually serious. "Have your parents ever used an accountant named Walter Jensen?" The name sounded vaguely familiar. I wasn't sure why. Then I remembered. Dad had mentioned him years ago. "A family accountant," Harold sighed. "I know him. What does that mean?" "Before I retired, Walter worked at my firm." I sat up. Harold continued. "He kept meticulous records." I didn't understand. Then Harold said something that changed everything. "Your parents' financial emergencies don't match their reported financial history." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "The numbers don't make sense." He explained that several stories my parents had told me involved expenses that should have generated documentation. Tax liens, medical debts, property disputes, legal settlements, yet none appeared where they should. The more Harold looked, the stranger things became. Then he asked a question. "Have your parents ever discussed Rachel's finances?" "No, they should have." The next week, Harold called again. This time he sounded disturbed. He had reached out to Walter, the retired accountant. Walter initially refused to talk, then changed his mind. Apparently he felt guilty, very guilty. Harold arranged a meeting. I flew out immediately. Walter was in his 70s, nervous, ashamed. The moment I sat down, he looked like a man preparing for a confession. I should have said something years ago. My chest tightened. What are you talking about? He opened a folder. Inside were copies of financial documents, old records, investment statements, trust paperwork. I recognized my parents' names. Walter slid one document toward me. Your parents were never broke. I felt the room spin. What? They've never been broke. I stared at him. He continued. They had setbacks sometimes, but never anything close to what they described. I couldn't speak. Walter opened another folder, then another. The records stretched back more than 20 years. Investment accounts, retirement funds, property holdings, assets. The numbers were substantial, far larger than I imagined. My parents weren't struggling. They were wealthy. Not billionaire wealthy, but comfortable enough to never need my money. I felt physically ill. Then came the question I dreaded. If they didn't need it? Walter looked down. They were funding Rachel. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it made no sense. Rachel was a teacher. She lived modestly, drove an old car, rented a small apartment. Nothing about her lifestyle suggested massive financial support. Walter nodded. I thought the same thing. Then he revealed the next layer. The money wasn't for Rachel. It was because of Rachel. I didn't understand. Walter explained. 22 years earlier, before I graduated college, Rachel had gotten involved with a startup, a risky investment. My parents co-signed loans, guaranteed obligations, used their assets as collateral. The company collapsed. The losses were devastating, not enough to ruin them, enough to frighten them. They became obsessed with protecting Rachel from consequences. Over time, they secretly paid debts, covered failed ventures, resolved legal issues, funded new opportunities, again and again. Whenever Rachel got into trouble, they rescued her. The costs accumulated, slowly, relentlessly, for 2 decades. Then Walter showed me a chart. The pattern was horrifying. Every time my income increased, their contributions to Rachel increased too, as though my success expanded their available budget. I stared at the page. Dates lined up perfectly. My promotions weren't coincidences. They were triggers. My parents monitored my financial growth, then adjusted their spending, using me as reimbursement. A realization hit me. I wasn't helping my parents. I was subsidizing a secret system. For 20 years, I asked the question burning in my mind. Does Rachel know? Walter hesitated. That answer was enough. I left the meeting shaking. I called Rachel immediately. She sounded confused, then defensive, then angry. Eventually, she admitted part of it. Yes, our parents had helped. Yes, there were investments. Yes, there were debts. But she insisted she never knew where the money came from. I almost believed her. Then she slipped. She mentioned one of the exact years my promotion occurred, a year I had never discussed. The silence afterward told me everything. She knew, maybe not every detail, but enough. A week later, I confronted my parents. I brought copies of everything, the spreadsheet, the records, the timelines. At first, they denied it, then minimized it, then justified it. Finally, the truth emerged. Mom started crying. Dad looked exhausted. Neither seemed surprised I had discovered it, almost relieved. Dad spoke first. Rachel needed help. So you lied to me for 20 years? We didn't lie. I laughed bitterly. You invented emergencies. We intended to repay you. The moment he said it, even he knew how ridiculous it sounded. I asked why they never simply told me the truth. Dad answered immediately, because you would have said no. The honesty hit harder than any lie, because he was right. I would have said no, not to helping Rachel occasionally, to financing decades of irresponsibility. Mom grabbed my hand. You don't understand. Then explain. She broke down. The story finally surfaced. Rachel had struggled more than anyone knew. Bad relationships, failed businesses, debt, lawsuits, poor decisions, repeatedly. My parents became trapped. Every rescue required another rescue. Every bailout led to another crisis. They convinced themselves things would improve. They never did. Then something else emerged, something I never expected. Dad admitted they were terrified of me. Not physically, emotionally. I stared at him. What does that mean? You didn't need us. I thought I misheard him. Dad continued. Rachel always needed us. The room fell silent. Mom nodded through tears. You were independent. Suddenly, dozens of childhood memories resurfaced. Rachel receiving extra attention, extra support, extra protection. While I was praised for handling things myself, I had interpreted it as trust. Now I saw something darker. Neglect disguised as confidence. The dependable child becomes invisible. The struggling child becomes the center of gravity. My success had become an excuse. Dad looked devastated. We thought you were stronger. I laughed bitterly. Strong enough to manipulate? Nobody answered. Then I asked the question that mattered most. How much? Dad looked away. Mom cried harder. Eventually, he whispered the number, $842,000. I couldn't breathe. Nearly $1 million. Gone, spread across 20 years, wrapped in lies. Disguised as emergencies, I left. For months I ignored every call, every text, every email. The silence felt necessary. Then another surprise arrived. Harold contacted me again. There was one final discovery, something Walter had found after our meeting, a trust, created years earlier in my parents' estate plan. My heart sank. I assumed it would confirm everything, that Rachel was inheriting everything. Instead, it revealed the opposite. The trust contained a clause, a massive one. If my parents died, Rachel's inheritance would be heavily restricted. Most assets would be managed by trustees, not her. Meanwhile, I would inherit my share directly. I was confused, then Harold explained. My parents knew Rachel couldn't manage money. They had known for years, maybe decades. They never trusted her. They just couldn't stop rescuing her. The realization was tragic. They weren't choosing her because they loved her more. They were trapped by guilt, fear, habit, maybe even shame. They spent 20 years protecting her from consequences and 20 years sacrificing me to do it. A year passed. Then, too, relationships slowly changed, not healed, changed. Dad developed health problems, real ones this time. Mom looked older, smaller somehow. Rachel finally entered financial counseling. For the first time in her life, nobody was rescuing her. The transition was ugly, but necessary. Eventually, she admitted something. She had always known our parents treated me differently. She hated me for it as a teenager, envied me, believed I was the favorite. When she learned the truth, she cried, because she realized being favored had actually damaged her. Being protected had prevented her from growing up. We still aren't close, but we're honest now, which is more than we ever had before. As for my parents, I never got my money back. Most of it is gone forever. The betrayal still hurts, probably always will. But the strangest part isn't the money. It's realizing that every promotion I celebrated wasn't really mine alone. Somewhere in the background, my parents were already calculating what emergency would appear next. Every achievement became an invoice. Every success became a funding source. For years, I thought those calls meant my family needed me. The truth was far worse. They needed what I represented: stability, responsibility, predictability. I wasn't the son they depended on because they trusted me. I was the son they depended on because they knew I would sacrifice myself before questioning them. And once I finally stopped doing that, the entire system they had built across 2 decades collapsed. Not because they ran out of money, because they ran out of someone willing to believe the lies.